All right, here we go. What's up, my friends? My name is Davin Youngs, and this is the Becoming Sound podcast, formerly known as the Free Your Voice, Free Your Life podcast, formerly known as the Sound of You podcast. Why do I keep changing the name of my podcast? That's a legitimate and great question, and one I hope to answer in this episode. But before I do, I just want to say, hey, how's it going? It's been a minute since we've been together. It's been a minute since I recorded a podcast episode, and for good reason. A lot of life has been unfolding, and I just felt like I needed to take a breath, take a pause, realign, and come back to you in this new shape, this new form, this new iteration, and I'm really excited to be doing it. The podcast space has been really so wonderful for me in the past as a way to foster a specific type of conversation, to stay connected around my work and community with you. And I don't take your ears for granted. So I'm really grateful that you're here with me. If you're streaming, if you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever it is that you listen to podcasts, I want to alert you to the fact that there's also going to be a video version. There is a video version of this podcast available on my new Substack, which bears the same name as this podcast, Becoming Sound, which I'm super stoked about. Substack, you're going to be able to find a number of ways to connect with me there through writing, through the podcast, through guided meditation practices, sound healing recordings, and I hope that the Substack will be a really beautiful constellation of my work and the community with which it invites in. You'll also be able to find a video recording of the podcast over at my YouTube channel. Just look for Davin Youngs on YouTube and you'll find this there. Okay, so I want to begin by saying two things. One is that it's my intention to step into this new format, this new podcast format, the new name, the new identity, shedding some of my perfectionistic tendencies of the past. I'm well aware that although I live in a creative world that embraces improbability, improvisation, experimentation, when it comes to how I show up in spaces like this, I tend to get perfectionistic about it. I tend to get precious about it. I tend to avoid the cringe, as they might say. And I'm going to try to not do that. I'd be lying to you if I said this was the first take of this podcast episode, but I'm really doing my best to sort of embrace the messiness of it all because it speaks to why it is that I'm coming back to this format in this way and with this name. And I just think right now more than ever, we're being called collectively to step into showing up in the world with the maximum amount of freedom and authenticity and humanity. We live in a world where we have increasing access to tools that can offer seeming perfection. And in light of that, I think as humans, we are craving the messiness of others' humanity. We don't want something that's quite so polished right now. We want to just feel connected through those things that make us distinctly human. And so I'm going to try to lead by example and show up here and just do a good job and be honest and be me and sort of free flowing and just see where this goes, where this takes me, and keep in all the extra ums and ahs and when I repeat the phrase sort of too often, which you'll inevitably hear. But here we go. And the other thing I want to say is that I'm aware that you have come to me through one of many possible doors into my space, into my room, my house. And those doors are varied. Like, for instance, you might know me from my voice coaching work. You might know me as a singer. You might know me from my sound healing work with the Reset. You might have attended one of my community singing gatherings. You may have joined me in my guided meditation groups that happen every Sunday morning. There are so many different ways and shapes and forms. Maybe you found recordings of me on the Insight Timer app or through YouTube. There are a lot of ways in which you could have entered into my orbit, into my sphere, into my world. And I'm aware that those different doors, they lead to the house of me. But they often feel surprising when they're opened, where people will be like, I knew you were a voice coach, but you also do this. Or I saw you were doing sound healing, but wait, you're doing this too. And However you got here, welcome. If you choose to hang around, there's a good chance that you see, despite the surprise of opening those doors and seeing all that other stuff that exists, but there's a good chance that you see the ways in which the dots of my work connect. But I also want to lead into this episode and this new format with the podcast by saying, for a long time, I felt pretty self conscious about my varied interests. Not self conscious in the way in which they inspire me to sort of engage personally, more so the ways in which they don't work necessarily well together from, let's say, an entrepreneurial standpoint or a capitalistic standpoint, or even how I describe myself at a cocktail party. One of my favorite things to happen is when someone will try to introduce me to someone else and they'll say, "This is Davin. He's actually, Davin, why don't you just explain what it is that you do?" At which point I don't have a concise, good answer either. And I think particularly with the podcast in the past, I had felt some personal pressure to try to collapse all of my offerings in upon themselves so as to make this really palatable as an opportunity to connect with you quickly and easily. And I'm just coming into this new shape, this new form, and saying, fuck that. I'm not going to do it anymore. It's not who I am. I also think it's potentially um, an influence of the ways in which I don't love our contemporary society, particularly around capitalism and productivity and the idea that anything you do needs to be consumable quickly by someone. The influences of algorithmic pressure on social media, that you should be able to go to an Instagram profile and understand quickly who someone is and what they do. I think it's all kind of bullshit. Like, it actually does make a lot of sense from a money making standpoint, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense from a human standpoint. It certainly doesn't make a lot of sense in my world where I have this really specific, sort of niche, winding path that I've been traveling. And like I said, if you hang out in my orbit for a bit, you'll see the ways in which the dots connect to the singing, the voice, the sound, the coaching, the meditation, the emphasis on well being, spirituality, philosophy, community, community connection. It does make sense. But I'm not really going to worry anymore about it being easily consumable. I'm a complex creature, as are you, and I'm just going to show up here honestly as me and see see if there are pieces of my story, of my experience, of the knowledge that I have that might connect with you in a way that might not even be direct, but inspires you to also be your complex self. We contain multitudes, you and I, and I'm in my big, expansive era where I just show up fully as me, first and foremost, accepting who it is that I am. I mean, if I'm honest with you, I've had some shame throughout my adult life around this. And I want to tell you a bit of a story around where that might have come from. But let this be a declaration of giving up any sort of self consciousness or shame about who I am. That's such a load of bullshit. It's a waste of time. It's not what I would preach to anyone else. It's not what I would want for anyone else. And so, despite my quirky, unusual offerings and interests, here I am in all my glory. Okay, so here's the story. I want to tell you a little bit about someone who's very important to me. And if you do know me, if you're a friend of mine, or if you've just followed me through social media, you may have caught a glimpse of this person, and it's my father. His name is Davin Youngs, and he's currently 89 years old, and he lives beautifully in Southwest Michigan with his wife, Lorraine. And my dad is my hero. He's an inspiration to me on so many levels. And I don't know what sort of karmic blessing I received to get a father like the one that I had, but it's it's one of the great joys and honors of my life to be his son. That being said, I want to tell you with some love that my dad is a certifiable weirdo. Like, he is a kooky character. And I say that in the best sense of the word, but you could imagine being a young person, a teen, a tween, that some of that weirdo-ness about my dad was a source of a bit of embarrassment or, yeah, that's the best word I got. I was just embarrassed sometimes. But let me give you a sense of what I mean. And I just also want to say my dad's not like a kooky person socially. He's a lovable person who connects with a lot of different people. But his interest in what he's pursued in his life has been so unusual and wonderfully so. Okay, so here's an example. For all of my life, my dad has played the musical Saw. Yes, like a handsaw, like a saw that you would take and go out and chop down a branch with or cut down a branch with. If you're not familiar, people take saws and they hold them between their legs, flat with the teeth facing outward. I'm sorry, the teeth facing inward, the flat side facing outward, and they take a violin bow and they bend the saw between their legs, and then they strike the violin bow or rub the violin bow against the flat edge of the saw, and it creates this strange and wonderful and haunting sort of operatic sound. It sounds something like and my dad learned to play the saw when he was a very young man, maybe even a teen, from someone local in his community. But throughout my whole life, my dad has traveled around, sometimes to folk festivals or church gatherings or what have you, community festivals, and he has played the saw. He even wrote a book on how to play the saw. For a long time, he was really committed to getting as many people to play the saw as possible. He would hand out saws. He would carry around Stanley Handyman saws and his book, and he would give them to people that he thought might be inspired to play the saw. So that's just one thing. My dad was an English teacher my whole life and interested in English and the humanities and literature and poetry. He has written poetry. He's written quite a bit. He was a United Methodist minister. He was intensely interested in the Bible and religion and philosophy. He loves and loved bicycles, and at one point decided to take up riding a big wheel bicycle, which you might know as the name penny farthing, like this old-timey bicycle that he would ride in parades with a top hat and coattails. And again, to the delight of our community and much to the awkward eyes turning away of me as a young teen. My dad is a woodworker. He makes beautiful wood pieces. He does wood carvings. He makes wood pens. He does chainsaw art with stumps in his front yard. He has something like a lion that he sculpted and created a morel mushroom. Gosh, so many things. He loves kites. He flies kites just for the joy of it. In fact, my mother passed away in 2021, and just a few days before her death, he had her out on the beach flying kites. And it was well into the fall season. He is a man that, for whatever reason, has had the courage and wherewithal to consistently pursue the things that he's been curious about, the things that bring him joy. And he has always seemed to pursue things that are somehow at the edges, things that people in his community, that in his peer group weren't necessarily interested in, but were delighted that he found interest in them. But I remember very specifically when I was quite young that my dad used to tell me this sort of observation about himself, that he believed he was what he referred to as a jack of all trades and a master of none. Maybe you're familiar with that terminology, that label. It's not really used affectionately. It's often used for someone that has seen to sort of flit about from thing to thing and not really have the capacity or wherewithal to really stick to something and get good at it. In fact, my dad went so far as to tell me a number of times that one of his biggest regrets in life is that he didn't feel like he was super successful in any specific area, that he had so many varied interests and he knew a little about a lot, but he didn't know a lot about any single thing. I took that story, that narrative, to heart. I actually saw from a young age that maybe I was quite similar to my dad. I had a lot of different interests, a lot of different things that I did or wanted to pursue. But I knew that I had a specific talent for singing, and I got a lot of praise and affirmation for singing. And I think in an effort to combat following down the same path as my dad, I really approached singing as my thing that I was going to become a master at, a success at, something that I even ended up at a conservatory for music at. And a lot of that was because I loved it, but some of it was inspired by this fear that I too would just be flitting from thing to thing. When the truth of the matter is, I never thought poorly or ill of my father because he had this propensity for doing so many different strange and unusual things. Fast forward to 2018. My dad was the primary caretaker for my mom, who was in the throes of Alzheimer's and dementia. She was really struggling and quite difficult to be with. And I think one of the ways in which I really grew to respect my father, even more than just his willingness to caretake for my mother, was that he didn't let go of himself throughout the experience. He kept pursuing activities like taking her to fly kites. He also, by the way, took violin lessons for many years. And throughout her dementia and Alzheimer's, he would just bring her along to the lesson and she would sit there literally plugging her ears because she became very sensitive to sound. But one of the things that he did is he took her to this community art school to do art classes. And not really because she was able to do them. I think he really took them for himself, took both of them for himself. But one of the classes that he took was this tile making class. And the teacher, who happened to be the owner of the studio, got to know my dad and she really started to like my dad. And as she got to know my dad, she uncovered all of these different idiosyncratic pursuits he had had throughout the years. Like I told you, playing the saw, doing chainsaw art, riding bicycles. She asked him at this time if he would be willing to give a talk at the community art school about what it means to live a creative and artistic life. And when he told me that she had asked him to do this, I thought, oh, I love that he's been asked to do this. A, because he's my dad, and it wouldn't even occur to me that he would be a candidate for this. But as soon as she said it, I thought, oh, yes, this is who he is. It's so wonderful for someone to see him in this way. But he reflected to me in the moment that, A, he didn't really feel like an artist, and he didn't really know that he had a lot to contribute to that conversation, but rarely would my dad turn down a microphone. And so he said, yes, I'm sure that I bear that quality as well. So as soon as he told me he was going to do this, I made the plan to come from Chicago to Michigan to be in attendance at the talk. And on the day of the talk, I'll never forget it because almost no one showed up. It was my dad, my mom, the woman who owned the studio, and one member from the community and me. But there we sat, willing to listen, and my dad stood up with his PowerPoint presentation. And the very first thing that he said to the group was, I have always felt like I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none. I have felt like I know a lot about a little and I'm not really great at anything. He also stated that he doesn't feel like an artist. He believes he had some skill and craft, but he felt like an artist was a term that was reserved for people who had X amount of skill on any given thing. And I sat there and I listened and I thought to myself, that's not true. None of that really feels true. Again, that jack of all trades, master of none, the ways in which it is used and the way in which my dad was using it was sort of a negative understanding of a life well lived. I mean, a more affectionate term might be to call him a Renaissance man. But again, I don't think any of it really captures what it is that my dad embodies. And that is someone who has the courage to follow their creative pursuits and live a freely expressed life, a truly artistic existence. I sat there and I listened to him talk about all the different things that he did and does. And I thought to myself, this is simply the story of a beautiful life. I feel no ounce of disappointment or embarrassment that he hadn't gotten farther in any singular pursuit. I simply felt pride that he had had the wherewithal and the sense of self to pursue these little nuanced experiences, these little unusual paths. And I also sat there and I thought to myself, boy, am I my father's son. I am so my father's son. I catch a glimpse of something new, something exciting, something that feels creative and creatively invigorating, and I go for it. And I almost can't stop myself. And it brings me joy, it keeps me happy. And that's the thing, as much as I hear in my father's, or I heard in my father's story, a little bit of regret or shame, I also just heard the story of someone who's lived a happy life, who's lived a full life, who hasn't held back, who hasn't been terribly inhibited by titles or what he should or shouldn't do or what was rational or practical. And so I think that that story of the jack of all trades, the master of none, that knowing a lot or knowing a little about a lot, I think it's more of a way in which my dad has kept himself separate from recognizing the joy that he has pursued, the joy that he has cultivated, the creative life that he has lived. I just wanted him in that moment to see him how we were all seeing him, which was through eyes of admiration. What an incredible man. So I thought to myself in that moment, I'm my father's son, but I refuse to be hindered by those sort of bullshit narratives, those bullshit labels, those things that keep us feeling separate and unable to enjoy the beautiful lives that we are cultivating. I know I'm committed to a life of flourishing. I know I am bound to creative whims. But I also know that I am someone, just like my dad, who will work very hard at the things I find life-giving and joyful. And that story around jack of all trades and master of none, the ways in which it's sort of used pejoratively is to be critical about someone who really can't get good at something. And that's not my dad. My dad's really good at a lot of things. And you know what? I've gotten pretty good at a lot of things too, particularly the things that feel super aligned with my inner being. And so I came back from that talk with that commitment to myself, but still I live in this world where there is an algorithm that tells me I need to broadcast myself through a very narrow lens so it's quickly consumable. I live in a society that says if it doesn't make money, it's probably not worthwhile. I live in a human condition just like you that prioritizes rationality over intuition. I often fall prey to the societal narrative that joy in and of itself isn't necessarily a worthwhile endeavor. And I say to all of that, it's not true. It's bullshit. And I have to keep fighting back, which is how I'm entering into this conversation in this space with you here now, just humbly but proudly me, living in the paradox of both, living in the freest expression of myself that I can continue to pursue. A couple things I've learned along the way is that when we stick to the narrative of how much does it cost? How much time is it going to take? Do I have enough talent? Am I too old? Is it useful? There's just less joy and there's less creative freedom. But it sounds cheesy, but when I listen to my heart, when I really commit to pursuing that which feels like it lights me up, that which feels that it is doesn't make any sense, that it's confusing, that why is it drawing me, that why am I suddenly spending all this time doing that? When I commit to those things, I'm a happier person. And you know what? When I'm a happier person, I'm a better servant to others. I'm a better connector. I'm a better communicator. I'm a better lover. But when I subscribe to those other narratives that keep me separated and isolated and doing things I don't really want to do, you know what I am? I'm a procrastinator. I'm not productive. And most of all, I'm pretty unhappy. I'm pretty miserable. And it's easy to fall down that path. Again, there are so many influences. But I think part of a life like the life of my fathers is to continue to do the weird shit. Like to continue to pursue the curious interests, to continue to pivot. And yes, to become very skillful at certain things, but don't let that skillfulness be something that locks you in to something that doesn't bring you joy. Again, the joy is actually the fastest path to mastery. Now, that's not to say that there won't be moments of hardship or difficulty or frustration, but I don't know how to say this other than the times that I've been willing to overcome that, it's because I've been pursuing something that I had to pursue, something that felt so important to my nature and my being, something that just felt truly me. You know, singing has always been that for me. I always think to myself, singing is one of the most useless endeavors that people could engage in, and that's why it's so magical. Because, of course, it's not useless, but it doesn't make any rational sense. But when you bring people into the experience of using their voice together, when I just sing, I inevitably walk away feeling better. And the truth is we know all of the scientific research supports that. That's how our hormones work. That's how adrenaline works. That's how oxytocin works. You name it, dopamine. It all comes into play when we use our voice. And that's why it doesn't make any sense, but it makes all the sense in the world. Or I think about when I discovered sound as a healing modality and how weird and out of line it seemed with the rest of my life, but how I couldn't help but pursue it. And before I knew it, and some of you will relate to this, I was buying all these instruments and I was signing up for retreats and I was going, and it just happened to correspond with a time in my life where there was also a spiritual awakening happening. See, your creative expression is always tied to your connection to source, to intuition, to God, if you're willing to use that term. And I think about when I first had the idea to bring my sound healing work to huge stages like Orchestra Hall. It doesn't make any sense. And to this day, as I try to be out in the world selling the reset, so many people give me so much confused feedback around the possibility of even doing it. It really doesn't make sense on paper. Doesn't make much financial sense. A lot of people just don't get it. But for those of us who do, for those who, like me, follow their creative compulsions, their creative instincts, it has made total sense and it feels perfectly aligned. I think to myself about last November when I had the chance to bring the reset to the Kennedy Center, and I can't tell you how in my body, in my spirit, in my heart, I felt as I stood up on that stage and looked out at the audience. It just felt right. It felt true. It felt honest. It felt like me. And now I'm in a season where I continue to have other explorations. I continue to have other interests. I continue to want to explore and pivot. And I desperately want to not give myself a hard time about any of that. I want to play. I want to experiment. I want to trust that the universe supports me in that. I want to rely upon my lived experience in that when I'm following those paths, I'm often in deepest connection and community. Sure, there are moments that feel like solitude is necessary and important around the learning. But once I've reached a way in which the expression, the creative expression or interest feels integrated into my being, inevitably it draws me into deeper relationship and connection with new people, new communities, new opportunities, new financial opportunities. I've seen it happen time and time again, and I get scared sometimes. I worry sometimes. I think, what the hell am I doing? This doesn't make any sense. Why would I do it? But I just know that if I want to be the ancestral evolution of my father, I have to get as free as possible. That I have to keep doing the kind of things that he was doing, but without any voice of self-criticism, without any voice or thoughts of shame. The courageous act of bucking the system and saying, you know what, even if this doesn't make $1, I trust that the universe will provide, and I trust that my heart, my joy, my creativity, my loving expression, it's what matters most. Now, I know that many of you will listen to this and you'll go, well, yeah, but what about my job? What about my family? What about my kids? All good points. But here's what I want to share with you. The reason that I changed the name of this podcast to Becoming Sound is because the title carries within it a paradox that I think is so beautiful and so important. And if you've attended my events, you know maybe that back in the day I used to use Becoming Sound for my sound healing events. But here's why. If you look up in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the definition for to heal, you'll find to become sound. And that's because sound is synonymous with wholeness. Soundness is a way to refer to completeness, the container that holds the entirety of you. In fact, we know scientifically and spiritually that each one of us is inherently sound, inherently whole. We have a unique and wonderful vibration. And many of us were raised with sort of misinformation that there's a part of us that's broken. But I don't believe that to be true. It's not my lived experience. My lived experience is that when I know I am sound, I remember who I really am, which is whole and full. But the becoming part is the paradox, this lived experience of forgetting that I have everything that I need, that everything about me can be contained in this vessel of my being, that I am such an expansive creature that all of my weird little idiosyncrasies and strange interests can be a part of the story of who I am and how it is that I flourish in this lifetime. And so the becoming is nothing more than the remembering, but it is the becoming back, the coming back, the being and the coming back. That paradoxical experience of already being everything that you are and that you need to be in your perfect sound, your perfect shape and form, and having yet to remember that your life can handle your job, your life can handle your family, your life can handle your many obligations, but when you remember the wholeness of who you are, the container expands. And it asks us to maybe shift some things and prioritize some things differently. But there's room for all of you in it. And when the things that you identify aren't you, aren't the wholeness of you, they have a way of fading off and joining the noise that lives outside the sound. becoming sound, the paradoxical experience of both being who I am, but always becoming more and more so. It's pretty powerful. It's pretty powerful to consider. And it's really who I want to be and how I want to be embodied in this lifetime. So this podcast is my attempt to come back to you and say, I'm not just a voice coach. I'm not just going to talk about voice here. I'm not just a sound healer. I'm not just going to talk about sound here. I'm not just a meditation teacher guide. I'm all of these things and much more. And I just want to feel the free, expansive nature of my being in all of its messy weirdness in spaces and places like this, because I believe that if I do that, and if you do that, we give each other permission to just enjoy being ourselves and to not be so difficult on ourselves, not be so hard on ourselves. I just saw this Instagram video the other day where it's like a young person interviewing an older person and asking them advice or what they wish they had known when they were much younger. And of course, the older person, the things that people always say is, I would have been a lot easier on myself. I was so tough on myself. And then the other thing they say is, I would have nurtured relationships so much more. Those two things, I believe, are intrinsically tied together. When we are easier on ourselves, when we enjoy our whole self, when we let ourselves be free in our being, we want to share that with others. And we come into those relationships with more compassion and empathy. And so this isn't a selfish endeavor. In fact, it's an endeavor that inevitably inspires creative connection. And creativity is our birthright. It's our calling. Art, artistry, you, the artist, this is your birthright. This is your calling. This is your best offering to this human experience. The other option is either stagnation or destruction. And if you don't want to be a part of that, your only choice is to give yourself the freedom to make and create and experiment and play and explore. And my friend, I'm going to be doing it with you. I'm going to get weirder and weirder and weirder. I don't suspect I'll be on a big wheel bicycle with a top hat anytime soon. I tried to ride that bike and it's really difficult. But I will be doing who knows what next. And I'd love for you, as much as you'd like, to join me for the ride. So it's good to be back. Here we are. And I'm excited to see how this all unfolds. So until next time, peace.